The salty wind slaps their faces as towering ships battle fierce storms, their wooden hulls groaning under relentless assault from the sea. Sailors, brave and battered, cling to trembling decks, their hands stained with tar and pitch, dangerous, smoky substances that kept the ships afloat, but at a deadly cost. The acrid fumes seep into lungs already strained by cold and salt, causing pain and despair. These men faced not only the vast, merciless ocean, but also toxic chemicals that could turn life aboard into a slow, silent death. Imagine the courage it took to venture into the unknown, knowing that each drop of tar or coat of copper might be there. Last, these stories of resilience and risk echo through history, revealing the human cost behind colonial exploration. If you love uncovering maritime secrets, subscribe now to reach 3,000 explorers. Tell us where you're watching from, and let us know you're on board with a ship emoji. You can imagine how it feels when the salty wind slaps your face with icy bite. The deck tilts beneath your feet, creaking like a restless beast. You're soaked in sea spray, your skin chapped and raw from days of relentless sun and bitter cold at night. The smell of wet wood, rotting rope, and burning tar hits your nose constantly. The ship groans and shudders, a living, breathing thing that's always on edge. Today we're diving into the gritty world of colonial maritime life, specifically the toxic substances sailors relied on to keep their ships afloat and somewhat manageable during the age of exploration. Imagine those vast wooden vessels, built from about 2,000 trees per ship, stretching across the horizon. They were marvels of craftsmanship, but maintaining them was a brutal, dirty job. Back then, naval construction depended heavily on materials like oak, pine, and cedar, woods chosen for strength and rot resistance. But wood alone couldn't fight the relentless assault of saltwater, fungi, and insects. So sailors and shipbuilders turned to chemicals, often toxic, to preserve and repair. These substances weren't just dangerous to the ships, they were deadly to the men handling them. Take tar, for example. It was the ship's lifeblood, used for sealing planks and caulking to prevent leaks. The process involved boiling tar, releasing thick black smoke and fumes that could choke you. Breathing it in for hours caused severe respiratory issues, sometimes leading to blindness or death. Sailors would dip rags over their mouths, but sometimes it was just a matter of enduring the pain. Then there was pitch, a derivative of tar, applied generously to hulls to ward off wood-boring pests. The application was messy and sticky, and the fumes, rancid and suffocating, clung to the sailors' clothes and skin. Inhaling these vapors could cause headaches, dizziness, and long-term lung problems. Copper sheathing was another innovation. It helped prevent marine growth, but applying it involved scraping off old layers and chipping away at the hull. The copper dust and fumes from the soldering and welding processes contained toxic metals, copper, arsenic, and lead. Sailors handling these materials suffered from poisoning, with symptoms like weakness, vomiting, and sometimes even mental confusion. Humans aboard. These ships weren't just exposed to chemicals, they faced a barrage of other hazards. The ship's maintenance involved frequent use of strong acids and corrosive substances. Historically, sailors would use vinegar or stronger acids derived from native plants or mineral sources to clean metal fittings or remove barnacles. Handling. Acids was a risky business. Splashes could cause severe burns, and inhaling fumes was dangerous. On top of that, the constant battle against mold and rot meant applying toxic preservatives. These often included arsenic compounds, which were cheap and effective but highly lethal. The sailors might have been aware that long-term exposure could cause skin lesions, internal organ damage, or even cancer. But in the grim reality of long voyages, often lasting 6 to 12 months, they endured these risks silently. Not to forget, some substances used in ship maintenance had a psychological toll. The smell of rotten eggs from sulfur compounds, or the acrid sting of chemical fumes lingered in the air and in your nostrils long after the workday. It was a shared suffering that bonded sailors in silent endurance. And let's not forget, the toxins weren't just a health hazard, they also impacted the crew's morale. Imagine that constant nauseating smell, the burning eyes, the cough that never quite went away, and the fear of poisoning unseen. Many sailors fell ill, some died, all while trying to keep their ships seaworthy. The combination of these toxic substances, tar, pitch, copper compounds, acids, was a necessary evil. Without them, Ships wouldn't survive long enough to reach distant lands, but the human cost was staggering. Crew members faced not only the treacherous seas, but also the silent, deadly menace of chemical exposure. This toxic cocktail of materials was part of their everyday life, shaping their suffering, their resilience, and ultimately, their stories of survival. The ships carried hopes, dreams, and plenty of pain, reminding us that beneath the grandeur of exploration, there was a gritty, often tragic human reality. Imagine you're standing on the deck of a ship, the wind whipping through your hair. The salty air stings your nose. The sun beats down cruelly, unrelenting. Your hands are cracked and bleeding from endless toil. You can feel the rough wood beneath your fingertips, the sweat that soaked into your clothes, the gnawing hunger in your belly. Now, picture that over and over, day after day, for weeks, sometimes months. The smell of tar and rotting bilge, the constant creak of the timbers, the icy splash of seawater on your face when the waves slam against the hull. That's the brutal reality of life during the age of exploration. Today, we're going to dive deep into the hidden human stories behind those long, treacherous voyages. Stories of survival, suffering, and astonishing ingenuity. If you're into history and maritime adventures, hit that like button now. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. There's a lot more coming that you won't want to miss. So, let's set the scene. It's the 15th to 18th centuries. European nations are racing across the oceans to claim new lands, riches, and glory. Ships like the caravel, the galleon, the frigate, these floating prisons of wood and canvas, carried men and women into the unknown. These vessels weren't big cruise ships. They were narrow, often barely wider than a modern bus, packed with supplies, crew, and all the toxic substances needed to keep the ship afloat. Here's the thing. Life at sea was a constant battle, not just against the waves or storms, but against your own body, your environment, and the mental torment that came with endless exposure to danger. And the toll? It was horrifying. Mortality rates during those voyages could reach up to 20%, sometimes even higher in the worst conditions. That means for every 100 men who set sail, 20 or more might never see land again. Think about that the next time you board a modern cruise or ship. How safe we are now thanks to centuries of hard lessons. Now, let's talk about the materials and substances that kept the ships floating and how they turned into toxic traps. The ships' hulls were made from cedar, oak, or pine, up to 2,000 trees in some ships. Over time, these woods would rot, crack, and become infested. To combat that, sailors used various substances. Some applied tar called pitch, hot, sticky, and gnarly. Imagine trying to paint a moving, pitching ship with thick, boiling tar. It dripped, burned, and sometimes splashed back, sticking to oar, skin, clothing, and even their hair. And that's not all. To prevent infestation by bugs and mold, crews slathered the wood with substances like lime, saltpeter, potassium nitrate, and even animal fats. But many of these chemicals were toxic, causing skin burns, respiratory problems, and long-term poisoning. Can you imagine inhaling the dense, acrid smoke from burning pitch, or the sharp, stinging sensation of salt and lime on open wounds? And it gets worse. To keep the crew in fighting shape, sailors relied on substances like arsenic compounds, mercury, and even lead-based products. These chemicals were deadly but deemed necessary to prevent wood rot, pest infestations, and disease. The irony? These substances, meant to preserve and protect the ship, often ended up poisoning the very people who sailed them. But it wasn't just the substances that made life hazardous. The environment itself was a killer. The cold of the North Atlantic could cut through your bones. The heat of the tropics, with its relentless sun and humid air, made dehydration and heat stroke common. Imagine sweating through layers of damp clothing, feeling your skin peeling, your gums bleeding, your teeth loosening. Dental issues, by the way, were rampant. Gums bleeding, teeth falling out, these were everyday struggles. Sometimes, sailors would resort to making their own rudimentary dentures from animal teeth or bone. And then, there was the constant threat of disease. Typhus, scurvy, dysentery. Scurvy, caused by vitamin C deficiency, could turn your gums into bloody raw flesh. Your teeth would loosen and fall out, your muscles weaken, and your eyesight dim. Without fresh fruits or vegetables, sailors faced a slow, agonizing decline. The crew's diet was mostly dried, salted meat and hardtack, flat, dry biscuits that could get moldy and larval. Imagine biting into that, only to have a crunchy, wormy surprise. And when the food spoiled or ran out, starvation and despair took hold. The psychological toll was just as severe. Imagine the cabin fever, the endless horizon closing in, the endless nights staring at the same dark, churning sea, the constant fear of storms or pirates. Men would go mad, sometimes fighting each other or jumping overboard. The mental breakdowns, the sleep deprivation, the horror of being trapped in a prison of wood and salt. These are the stories rarely told but felt deeply. And it wasn't just the crew enduring this. The shipbuilders and the ship's medic, those unsung heroes, had their own struggles. They used rudimentary tools, chisels, hammers and saws, to carve and assemble ships out of raw timber. They had to patch the hulls with pitch lime and tar, often in harsh weather. Medics relied on herbal remedies, bleeding and the occasional amputation, without anesthesia. Imagine the screams, the blood, the sweat. Sometimes the ship's condition was so dire that it became a floating tomb. The toxic substances, the relentless weather, the death of crew members, these ships were combat zones. Every day they teetered on the edge of catastrophe, a fragile miracle of engineering and human endurance. And when disease or rot claimed a ship's crew, the ship itself sometimes became a graveyard, a floating mausoleum drifting across the ocean. But despite all this suffering the sailors endured, they adapted, invented, and fought through the pain. They used every trick, every bit of knowledge they had, sometimes by trial and error, to survive. Their stories of hardship and resilience tell us a lot about human courage. We can forget how easy we have it today in our warm beds and hospitals, thanks to their sacrifices. If you want to know exactly how sailors managed to navigate these toxic, brutal conditions, how they kept their ships afloat, their bodies somewhat intact, and their spirits somewhat alive, there's a whole video here on the channel. But for now, just remember, those voyages weren't just about discovering new lands. They were about enduring hell on the high seas. And trust me, the next time you see a modern ship, shiny and clean, you might want to tip your hat to the brave souls who went before, because their stories are what made the safe, connected world we live in today possible. Imagine yourself on a ship, miles away from land, surrounded by nothing but endless, unpredictable ocean. The sun beats down mercilessly during the day, turning the deck into a blistering inferno, while at night, cold winds cut through the wood like a knife. You can almost taste the salty air, thick and briny, clinging to your skin and filling your lungs. This wasn't just a voyage. It was a brutal test of human endurance, a journey through hell on the high seas. But behind every daring voyage was a series of technical challenges, problems that threatened to end lives, wreck ships, or quite literally, sink dreams of discovery. Today we're diving into some of the most toxic substances used in naval maintenance during the colonial era, substances that sailors and shipbuilders relied on to keep their vessels afloat and seaworthy. And trust me, these weren't pretty chemicals. They were deadly, corrosive, and often as hazardous as the sea monsters sailors feared. Let's start with one of the most notorious, creosote. This thick, dark oil, derived from coal tar, was used as a powerful preservative for wood. Imagine you're a shipbuilder, scraping and hammering away, working in the open air. You apply creosote to the hull's timbers, watching it soak deep into the wood fibers. But here's the catch. Creosote is a toxic, carcinogenic nightmare. Its fumes are sharp and acrid, burning your nose and throat, making your eyes water and causing dizziness. Prolonged exposure could lead to terrible skin sores or even cancer. Not that anyone truly understood it back then, but it was so effective at preventing rot that they'd coat entire ships with it. Sometimes even up to 2,000 trees worth of creosote in a single vessel. Cruel but real. Now imagine working in that environment, sweat mixing with bitter fumes, your skin drying out and cracking. And it wasn't just the workers who suffered. The creosote would leach into the water, poison the crew, and turn the ocean around into a toxic soup. But they had no better options. Without creosote, the wood would rot away after just a few years, especially in the humid, salty air. So sailors and builders accepted the dangers, hoping the ship wouldn't become a floating coffin. But creosote wasn't the only villain. Enter amtar and pitch and chi, thick, sticky substances essential for sealing hulls and preventing leaks. Sailors called it the black gold, but it was as hazardous as it sounds. The process of applying tar involved heating it over open fires, releasing fumes that stung the eyes and burned the lungs. The heat was intense, often causing burns or fires on deck. During the application, sparks and splatters could ignite the whole ship. Imagine the chaos: sailors fighting flames, coughing through clouds of smoke that coated your lungs, your skin sticky with molten black goo. Even after cooling, the tar remained an irritant, causing rashes and skin infections. Without proper sealing, the ship's timbers would absorb water, risking sinking or structural failure. It was a dangerous dance of fire, fumes, and sticky messes. And it didn't stop there. Consider arsenic compounds, used in anti-fouling paints. That's right, to prevent barnacles and seaweed from clinging to the hull, they coated ships with toxic paints containing arsenic. The process was simple but deadly. Sailors would paint the hulls with a mixture that included arsenic salts, which would kill marine growth but also seep into the water. It was a slow poison, affecting not only marine life but also the crew. Splashing and splattering during the application meant sailors inhaled arsenic dust, which could cause vomiting, tremors, or even death after prolonged exposure. Sometimes the paint would flake off, releasing more toxins into the water and onto the sailor's skin. But the dangers didn't end with chemicals. Let's talk about arsenic's close cousin, copper sulfate. This substance was used as an anti-fouling agent as well. They'd paint the hulls with a mixture that, while effective, was also highly toxic. When ships docked, sailors would sometimes scrape off paint with rudimentary tools, releasing clouds of toxic dust in tiny particles that settled on their clothes, skin, or were inhaled. The long-term effects: gingivas bleeding, teeth falling out, severe poisoning. That was the cost of keeping a ship clean. Now picture the maintenance process. Sailors and shipbuilders worked in tight, hot spaces, often with little protective gear. No gloves, no masks, just their grit and courage. They relied on rudimentary tools: chisels, saws, paints made from natural substances but laced with deadly chemicals. To patch leaks, they'd sometimes use lime tea, a substance that reacts violently when mixed with water, releasing heat and irritating fumes. Lime was important for disinfecting and sealing, but it was caustic and could cause severe burns if mishandled. Sailors would wear simple cloths or sometimes nothing at all, exposing their skin to the harsh chemicals. Imagine the constant pain, the burns on their hands and faces, as they worked in sweltering heat, with the smell of burning wood, tar, and chemicals filling the air. And what about arsenic-based anti-fouling paints? Oh, they're a perfect example of how necessity bred dangerous solutions. Ships had to stay at sea for months, sometimes years. The hulls needed protection. They'd paint them with arsenic-infused compounds, a process that took days and left a lingering smell of sulfur and decay. The crew would spend days inhaling dust and fumes, their lungs burning, their eyes watering, their skin itching and blistering, gums bleeding, teeth falling out. The human toll was brutal, but it wasn't just the chemicals. Sometimes the ships suffered from mold, fungi, and bacteria that thrived in the damp, salty environment. To combat this, they used a lime-based washes, Q, and herbal mixtures. But those weren't always effective. Mold could rot wood from within, turning the hulls into crumbling shells. When a ship's wood decayed, it was like being caught inside a ticking time bomb. You never knew when the next leak or collapse would happen. All these toxic substances paint a grim picture. But it's important to realize these were the only options they had. No modern preservatives, no environmentally safe paints. They relied on whatever they could get their hands on, often knowing it was dangerous but desperate to keep their ships afloat. The sailors were brave, and sometimes foolish, risking their health every day. Think about this. Sailors inhaled fumes that could cause immediate nausea or long-term cancer. Their skin was covered in burns, rashes, and sores. Their bodies endured pain, illness, and exhaustion, all for the sake of exploration, conquest, and trade. The ships were floating laboratories of toxic experimentation, survival, and human grit. Today, we have safer, environmentally friendly coatings, but back then it was a different story. The cost of keeping a ship seaworthy was paid in human suffering. Every application, every patch, every coat of paint was a gamble, with lives, with health, with the very vessel itself. If you want to get the full picture of how sailors fought through this toxic, brutal environment, how their daily routines involve more pain than you can imagine. There's a whole video here on the channel, but for now, just remember, those ships of the colonial era weren't just marvels of wooden engineering. They were dangerous, toxic prisons floating on the water, built by human hands and human suffering intertwined. Their stories remind us how far we've come and how much bravery it took to sail those treacherous, poisoned waters. Imagine yourself standing on the deck of a ship, the salty wind whipping through your hair, the wood creaking beneath your feet. The sun beats down, relentlessly, but it's not just the sun you're feeling. It's the toxic fumes wafting from the paint and tar that coat your vessel. Back then, keeping a ship seaworthy was a brutal, toxic gamble. And the sailors? They were the ones paying the price every single day. The truth is, these ships weren't just marvels of wooden engineering. They were floating laboratories of human suffering. To keep them afloat, the crews relied on a cocktail of toxic substances that today we'd never dream of using. And trust me, the human toll was staggering. Let's start with the paints. They used lead-based pigments, heavy metals that could seep into the wood, making the hull resistant to rot and barnacles. The sailors would smear these paints onto every inch of the ship with crude brushes made from pig bristles or wooden sticks. The smell alone was enough to make your stomach turn, but they didn't have a choice. Without these paints, the ship would rot from the inside out in a matter of years. The problem? Lead poisoning was a silent killer. Gums bleeding, teeth falling out, tremors, symptoms that many dismiss as fatigue. Imagine the gnawing pain inside your mouth, the sharp taste of blood whenever you brushed your tongue against bleeding gums. And it wasn't just lead. They coated the wood with tar, thick, viscous, black as hell. This tar, made from pine or birch wood, had antiseptic properties, but it was also a nightmare to work with. The crew would open the thick barrels, and a cloud of boiling, smoky fumes would envelop them. Breathing in those fumes was like inhaling 1,000 tiny knives slicing into your lungs. The smell was acrid, sharp, and persistent. Every breath was a gamble. Will I get a lung infection? Will I choke on the vapor? And if that wasn't enough, the tar was sticky, so it would stick to your skin, hardening into a crust that was nearly impossible to wash off. Gingiva sangrando all the time. The constant contact with these substances made sailors' skin rashes, sores, and burns inevitable. But it wasn't just the paints and tar. They used arsenic compounds to ward off pests, little critters that loved to chew and nest inside the ship's wood. Arsenic was deadly, even in small doses, and sailors would often get exposed through their skin or inhaling dust. It caused weakness, nausea, and sometimes even madness. Cruel but real. Now the crew's environment was a toxic hellscape. Imagine being packed into a wooden prison with hundreds of other men, all breathing in fumes, absorbing poisons through their skin. The ship's engine of survival, the maintenance routine, became a daily ritual of poisoning. Every patch of rusted metal, every cracked plank, every patch of rotting wood was a potential disaster waiting to happen. They'd spray, scrub, paint, and patch, all with dangerous chemicals, knowing full well that each application was a gamble with their health. And yet they kept going. Because crossing the Atlantic, sailing to the Indies, exploring uncharted waters, that was their destiny. They believed in something greater than themselves, but that belief came at a heavy cost. The human toll wasn't just sickness, it was psychological too. Imagine the mental toll of working inside a dark, sticky, toxic prison. Crew members would suffer hallucinations, nightmares, and depression. Many would become numb to the suffering, their bodies and minds battered beyond recognition. Take John, a young sailor from a small coastal village. He signed up, dreaming of adventure and riches, but by the second year on the ship his gums bounded with blood, and his teeth were loose. He trembled constantly, his hands shaking as he painted the hull with lead-based paints. His skin was raw and blistered. He'd wake up coughing up black phlegm, his lungs burning. Yet, he refused to leave. He'd seen others fall ill and die in the hold, their bodies turning stiff and cold. He knew that if he stopped, he might never see his family again. His resilience, born in pain, became a testament to human grit. But what about the psychological scars? The constant exposure to death, disease, and decay reshaped these sailors. They became hardened, almost numb. Some, unable to handle the torment, went mad. Others learned to suppress their fear, their pain, with alcohol or superstition. The ship's tight quarters became a crucible of mental breakdowns. Crew members would clutch their heads, scream into the stormy night, convinced the ship was cursed. And here's the real kicker. The drugs they used to fight infections or pain, often they turned to raw, unprocessed substances. Opium, for example, was common, but it was a double-edged sword. It dulled the pain, yes. It also clouded judgment, making accidents and mistakes inevitable. Some sailors, overwhelmed by constant suffering and despair, became addicted, sinking deeper into a fog of misery. Think about the resilience. Think about the courage it took to endure this hellish routine. These sailors weren't just brave, they were transformed by suffering. Every blister, every cough, every tremor was a badge of endurance. Their bodies and minds bore scars that few modern eyes can understand. Now contrast that with today. We protect ourselves with modern paints, environmentally safe preservatives, respiratory gear and strict safety protocols. No more inhaling fumes as if we're inhaling death. No more risking our health just to keep a ship afloat. We're fortunate and grateful for that progress. We can forget those toxic routines. We can focus on exploration, discovery, not survival from poison. But let's not forget the people behind these stories, the anonymous sailors who endured unimaginable suffering. Their sacrifices paved the way for the ships and safety standards we enjoy now. They faced the brutal reality of human error and environmental ignorance driven by hope and necessity. So next time you see a modern ship, think for a moment about what it took to get here. The brave souls who sailed in toxic, fragile prisons, risking everything, often paying with their health and lives. Their stories are silent, yet they echo through history. Their resilience reminds us how courage isn't the absence of fear. It's facing death with unwavering resolve. If you want to dive deeper into the nitty-gritty of these toxic substances and their effects, I've got a whole video on it. But for now, just take a second to appreciate how far we've come and honor those who endured it all. Their sacrifices made the safe modern world of sailing possible. And hey, if you enjoyed this story, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. Next up, we'll explore more about the innovations that revolutionized maritime safety. Remember, the courage of those sailors wasn't just about navigating the seas. It was about fighting through a toxic hell on Earth, driven by hope, resilience, and human grit. Their legacy isn't just history, it's a testament to the strength of the human spirit.